Let's talk real estate, and let's talk real estate with the team from Cavendish, Maxwell. Why? The numbers are hot off the press. They are too hot to handle, and that's why Zacky Sajjad has joined us in studio, Director Business Development and Client Relations at CavMax. Dubai's office market experiencing explosive growth in the first half of 2026. Zacky, you've got the numbers in front of you. Good morning to you, first and foremost.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Nice to see you as always. Right, what's the data tell us about the first half of this year?
Okay, I mean, it's been an incredible year for the first half of this year. We've had nearly double in terms of value. So we're at sort of 15.8 billion dirhams worth of transactions compared to sort of the same period last year. And if we look at this kind of story behind that, there's been a huge number of high value transactions. So offices, single offices that have sold at 20 million dirhams and above. We've seen nearly 220 of those single transactions. So that's why the value story. And on volume, we've also seen an incredible 2,600 transactions so far in the first half of this year. Admittedly, that moderated slightly in Q2 versus Q1, but when we compare Q2 26 versus Q2 25, we're still nearly 5% up on the volume of transactions. So it's been a phenomenal year for people in the office segment.
So this is, if we take the two Qs of the H, so Q1 and Q2 of the first half of this year, there will be those out there going, come on, these are just numbers from an extraordinary Q1. But you're suggesting that the momentum continued into Q2?
Yeah, continued into Q2. I mean, where we saw a bit of a dip was in May, actually. We saw nearly 25% reduction in the volume of transactions in May. But if you remember, we all had a week off because of the holiday period. So that's probably a bit of the story there. I mean, we have seen sort of some real great growth. And if we start, I'm sure we'll get into it later, in terms of certain areas around the city. And no surprises there in terms of where we've seen the biggest growth. DIFC, downtown, Business Bay, especially those three areas. So I think we've had a very, very positive year in the office segment, and bearing in mind, when it comes to commercial real estate, you're often talking about longer term leases. So if somebody's signing an office lease, they're signing for 5 years. So even when we look at the rentals and on the rental transactions, okay, maybe slightly down quarter on quarter, but we're still trading at average rental rates of nearly 190 dirhams per square foot, which is pretty good. That's across the city. Now, obviously, that delta really jumps up when you're looking at areas like DIFC and downtown compared with, say, the traditional areas of Deira or Bar Dubai. So, all in all, pretty positive.
Yeah, I would, because I'm in the commodities business, JLT.
Yeah.
So the delta between, if I go up to Index Tower for a meeting or, of course, ITD Brookfield, it's packed.
Yeah.
JLT tells a different story. I mean, there has been some reduction in the number of volumes of business that are going through there. But how is JLT faring? Because Uptown is the new Almas Tower, with all respect to Almas Tower.
Yeah. So if we look at the volume of transactions, Business Bay is well ahead. I think nearly just over 800 of those transactions were in Business Bay of the 2,600. JLT still ranks number 3 on that list.
Right.
And interestingly enough, Al Safouh 1 is now number 2, which in Q1 was number 1, but that's due to one development, which I think, obviously the Danube Shahrukh development, which is still, that's still in number 2 overall for the half of this year. So we look at JLT, admittedly, we've still seen some positive growth year on year, approaching 15% in terms of the rental growth on there. So overwhelmingly still a very popular destination. I think if we look at it, we're still seeing supply constraints in that top tier segment of grade A offices. And so naturally, that's why you're seeing that sort of Index Tower and the likes sort of going down towards DIFC, Sheikh Zayed Road, downtown, where they are, there's just nothing available.
Off-plan or turnkey? What are we talking about here?
Off-plan, yeah. 70% of these transactions are off-plan so far this year, which again is an interesting sort of observation, if you like, for this year, because historically commercial offices we haven't seen a huge volume in off-plan sales there in that segment. Yeah, resi, we're totally used to seeing that. That's always been the case, but that's where we've seen a real change in the last, I would say this trend has been going on for 18 months, where more and more people are buying off-plan offices.
The other thing as well, that I've noticed, especially in the time that I've been here, is that regardless of location, people are setting roots here.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people seem to be buying what they deem, okay, I don't want to rent, I'm going to be here for a while. The company, the tax regime, obviously, so that's made people cement themselves here. So people are now buying offices instead of renting. So have you seen a big sort of transition into that?
Absolutely. I think also for people that operate in certain industries like professional services like ourselves, or, sort of that service-based industry, having an asset on their books as well.
Right.
This is where we're seeing there's a lot of that. And actually, if you look at it, in the secondary market, the overwhelming volume of transactions are in that 1,000, 2,000 square foot segment. And in the off-plan market, it's 1,000 square foot and below, which that's probably more a story of Elsevier One than anything else. That's where we're seeing those numbers. But in that secondary space, to your point, it is definitely, we're seeing that trend, has been going on now for about 18 months, because people are looking at it and thinking where rents have now got to. Actually, if I were to buy an office, 10 years' time, I've kind of paid for it, and I have that asset sat on my books.
But just to the point that you made earlier on, and this comparison with residential market at the moment, the residential market, we're hearing about certainly a bottoming out, not a bottoming out, but a more sensible rent approach, etc. What are we talking about when we're talking about sale prices and rents in offices? Are we seeing major changes there or not?
So, we're seeing over 15% increase in sales prices year on year, and a 14% year on year increase in rents on commercial offices.
Wow.
So, the story, this is what I'm saying. So if we look at it quarter on quarter, Q1 to Q2, there's been a softening. But when we look at the end of the first half of 26 versus the first half of 2025, that's where we're seeing. And actually, I would say that's probably twofold, to your point. People setting up roots here, but also resilience. People not willing to sort of budge or shift. This is not sort of 2008 or 2009 and the scenarios that we were seeing during that sort of challenging period. I think people are very much sort of thinking, well, stick and hold.
Numbers don't lie. You got the numbers there for the first half of the year, but obviously Q3 beckons as well. Predictions ahead of Q3?
Look, I think to your point earlier when listening to you guys driving in, I think we're going to see a slightly quieter Q3. I think the seasonality that we've historically seen in the market, which disappeared the last couple of years, we were seeing phenomenal Q3s the last 2-3 years. I think that seasonality is coming back. It does feel a little bit quieter. People have taken the opportunity to go away. So I would imagine the data will reflect that come the end of Q3. However, I'm expecting quite a busy September, so that might, sort of give a slight positivity to the end of Q3. Q4, if we continue the way we have been continuing, and the sort of a deal is done regarding straight up home moves, etc., I would expect a real sort of boom in Q4.
Zacky, got to leave it there. Really appreciate your time. Thanks so much
Pleasure.
indeed for sharing those numbers with us. It's always appreciated. So a big thanks to you and all the team at Cav Max. That's Zacky Sajjad, the Director of Business Development and Client Relations at Cavendish Maxwell, releasing those numbers this morning. The Dubai office market experiencing growth in the first half of this year. The numbers available from Cavendish Maxwell. Right, let's take a little bit of a breather.